So what I'm going to show you today is the order of events that take place up until the end, which is the tribulation comes first, then the great tribulation, then the coming of the Lord and the gathering together, which is the rapture, and then the day of the Lord or day of Christ, which is the wrath of God. In Matthew chapter 24, starting at verse 1, going to verse 9, you have tribulation, which is called the beginning of sorrows. And then after verse 10 to verse 27, you have the great tribulation. They start killing people, and it gets really bad. Then from verse 27 and on, you have the coming of the Lord, the gathering together, which is the rapture, and the day of the Lord, which is the day of Christ, and the wrath of God. In 2 Thessalonians, you have the same pattern with less information. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul says, "Now I beseech you, brethren, by the coming of the Lord, by our gathering together unto him." So he's telling you the end in the very first verse. He's going to take you all the way to that point, which is the coming of the Lord and the gathering together, which is the rapture. So then in verse 3 and 4, he shows you the events that precede or that are before the coming of the Lord, which is an apostasy from the faith, a falling away from the faith, the man of sin, the son of perdition, being revealed and sitting in the temple of God, which is verse 15 in Matthew 24. And then Paul takes you to the coming of the Lord and the destruction of the Antichrist. It's the same exact thing as Matthew 24, just with a little less information, in which if you look in Paul's epistles through them, you see the same information or very similar information as Matthew 24, talking about all of the last days deception. Then in 1 Thessalonians, we have the same pattern. In chapter 4, verses 14 through 18, we have the gathering together or the rapture. Then in the very next chapter, chapter 5, we have verses 1 through 4 talking about the day of the Lord, which is the wrath of God. And in verse 9, it says that is what we are not appointed to, the wrath of God, which is the day of the Lord or the day of Christ, as Paul puts it. The reason in 2 Thessalonians and other books of Paul's epistles that he says the day of Christ is because Christ means anointed. In the Old Testament, it was only called the day of the Lord. But when Jesus came in the flesh and fulfilled all righteousness, now Paul uses the term Christ. It's a progressive revealing, progressive revelation. Now we're looking at the book of Revelation, speaking about the same time period. Starting in chapter 6, we have the seals that start opening up. There are 7 seals total. On the first seal, all the way to the 5th seal, in Revelation chapter 6, what you're looking at is Matthew chapter 24, verses 1, all the way to about verses 27, which is the tribulation and the great tribulation, and the first 5 seals of the book of Revelation, just like Matthew 24. Then you see on the 6th seal, after the 5th seal, because the 5th seal shows that everybody is getting killed for their faith, the 4th seal shows a lot of death. But on the 6th seal, then you see the appearing of Christ. The heavens are rolled back as a scroll, and the Lamb is sitting on the throne in heaven. That is where the rapture is, or the gathering together. That is the beginning of the coming of the Lord. And it's perfect because in the very next chapter, chapter 7, you see everybody in heaven at the throne of God. And then perfectly in sequence, chapter 8, the 7th seal is opened, and that is where the beginning of the day of the Lord is, or the wrath of God, or as Paul calls it, the day of Christ. So you see how all these books are talking about the same time period in pretty much the same way. But we're seeing this great pattern, this rapture sequence. Now to answer somebody's question when he said, Well, what about when it says endure till the end in Matthew chapter 24? Well, when you read the context of what it's talking about as far as enduring till the end, all around that verse you see people dying, being killed for their faith, and also from pestilence and famine. Because Jesus goes on directly after that and says, if he didn't shorten the days, there shall be no flesh left. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. So when he says endure till the end so that you'll be saved, he's talking about your flesh and your body. You know, people are going to die. People are going to go through a lot. But it doesn't mean that they're not saved. Even when the Apostle Paul speaks about the word salvation, if you want to just Google the word salvation in Paul's epistles, it doesn't always mean being with God eternally saved your soul like that. It's also talking about your earthly status, so to speak. And also your spiritual status combined with your earthly status. But not being saved in the sense that going to hell or heaven. You see, that's the trick with the Bible is sometimes the same words mean different things. Like the word salvation, or when he says endure till the end, it's not always talking about the same thing. Just like the sons of God. Well, angels are referred to as the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6. When they came down and they mated or procreated with women and had giants. So those were angels. But then we're called sons of God also once we get saved. You see, so the same words can mean different things. So again, to answer the question, when it talks about enduring till the end and you'll be saved, that's talking about flesh, your fleshly status. Thank you. God bless.